All right, everybody, welcome to our latest venue webinar. Today we have got a pretty cool topic. I got to tell you, we're going to talk about snapshots today in the venue software. And, you know, as a mixer who's been doing this a long time, I got to tell you, getting snapshots, especially of this kind of capability, man, it is such a dream to work with this in a live setting. And I think it's one of the most powerful things that that Venue has to offer in its software package, combined with the control surfaces. It's just so great and so easy to use. So hopefully I'm going to take you through all the finer details today, and we can get this all in 1 hour. So that said, well, actually, before we get started, I better do a little housekeeping here and tell you, of course, that we're going to have Q&A at the end, which like we always do. So we're going to save all of our questions for our live questions for the end of the webinar. There are people on the chat right now that can answer questions as they come up. We have some of our, some of the guys that work on the design of the software, as well as some of the guys that are working as product specialists. So they're in the chat and they can answer your questions as they come up. Or actually, it's in the Q&A, I should say, not the chat. So press that little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and you'll get to the Q&A portion of it. And then I'll answer some of them live on camera when we finish right at the end, okay? All right, so that said, let's get going, because I have got a lot to show you today and a lot to cover. So as with all things that we are talking about in Venue these days, we're driving home this idea of interoperability. And that in mind, everything I show you today is going to apply to all Venue systems, because they all work on the same software. They all have the exact same capabilities in terms of snapshots, et cetera. So keep that in mind. That is the whole concept of unified platform, right? Is that what works for one works for all. All right, so I thought we would start today just with going over a few key terms that you need to understand. There's some key words in the lexicon that are kind of unique to snapshots. So let's start there and just go through a few things. And probably the first and foremost one is the word scope. All right, scope. It's kind of an odd word on its own, but it applies specifically to snapshots. And we have two kinds of scope in our snapshots. We have a parameter scope and we have a channel scope. Now, all scope really means in the context of snapshots is that you're going to choose whether something is available for a recall, meaning a channel or a channel and its parameters, right? Or what specific parameters are available for recall to that channel. So it's two different things. You have to pick the channels that are going to be available, and then you have to pick the parameters that are going to be available for recall, and that is called scoping. So you'll see that we're going to do a bunch of that today in the examples. So just keep that in mind. Scope is picking what is going to be available for recall. The term automation safe, I have found this to be a pretty misunderstood term in a lot of circles. Automation safe in almost all automation softwares of this type indicates that the input that you chose or the channel that you've chosen to be input or safe from automation, excuse me, I'll try to speak here, is actually safe from recall. However, it is not safe from store, right? You'll find that as a part of our topology here, which is a store all recall filtered mechanism. So, but just keep in mind, automation safe only means safe from recall. And we can put a channel into automation safe and save it from being recall as we recall snapshots at the push of a button. Update, as you guys that have used our software for a long time might remember, we had a term called propagate in the software previously, and it seemed like just kind of confused the issue for a lot of people. So we've actually changed it to update. So it is a way to make changes and then update a given loaded snapshot or any number of snapshots. And again, you'll see that in action today. Preview in our world of snapshots means you are going to put the console in a state where you can review an upcoming snapshot or even edit and store an upcoming snapshot while a previously loaded snapshot is actually operating. So if you had a snapshot read call, there was audio going through the console and you went into preview mode, you actually lose the ability to edit the loaded snapshot. You are now editing any other snapshot that you want to recall. You can recall and store other snapshots at your leisure without interrupting the currently loaded snapshot. So that is the definition of our preview mode. Store and recall, and really the only reason I put this in there because it's obvious what store and recall means, but is to highlight the idea that we work on a format in our snapshot system that is store all, recall filtered, or scoped. All right, you can look at it either way. And what this means is that when I hit the store button and confirm it, I'm storing all settings on the console, all settings. But as I recall the snapshot, I'm going to pick what I'm going to recall out of that snapshot. So I may hit the store button and store every setting on the console, but when I go to recall it, I may have chosen to only recall one fader and one parameter on that particular snapshot. So as opposed to being a recall, I don't want to say it's the opposite of that. Okay. I've been in store all recall filtered for so long, I don't even know how to say the opposite of that, but it would be recall all store filtered, where you're actually choosing what you're going to store on every snapshot. Even though that can, in kind of this context, can sound like a preferable way, in live setting for live work, it actually becomes a very, very challenging thing to manage. So we subscribe to the store all recall filtered format, and that has worked out really well for us. Okay. Okay. All right. So that said, here we go. All right. So let me get to my venue screen here, hopefully. Push you over here for now. All right, so here you see my venue screen, and obviously you see a blank snapshots window there. We haven't created any snapshots here. But I'm just going to take you on a little tour of this. Oh my goodness, really? Please stop. See all my email there for a second. Okay, so here we go. So in the window here, I'm just going to take you across the tabs. We're going to take you around the area here just to highlight all these areas in terms of what you mean. So to do so, I'm actually just going to create a new snapshot here. And you notice everything kind of comes to life there. All right, so let's start by just explaining scope. And so as you can see here, all of the faders, once we created the new snapshot, are highlighted in red. So that indicates that they're all available for recall right now. So if you notice here over on the side tabs over here, I'm looking at all inputs, all outputs, and layouts that I currently have in play. So here we have all the inputs are available for scope. If we don't want all inputs available for scope, we might just double tap on none, and now notice it's cleared all of them out, and we can go back and individually select channels that we would be available for recall in this snapshot that we just created, okay? So that is channel scope. If we go up here to this area, and maybe I'll annotate this here just to make sure we all play along here. So this area right here is where you're going to do your parameter scope. And as you notice, all the different parameter types are there. So if you notice right now on the 3 faders that we have scoped for recall, those faders would only have their fader positions and their mute status available for recall. We're choosing what parameters we want to have recalled in that particular snapshot, right? So this is parameter scope. And we do a really handy thing for you here in the software. This has saved me more often than I want to probably admit. But if you scroll your mouse over your trackball or your pointing device, whatever, over any one of these parameters, and then you look down in the lower left-hand corner, see if I can make sure you can see all of my screen there. I think you can. You can probably just see enough. If I scroll over that, notice it says EQ and high pass settings for each scoped strip. Okay? If I go over dynamics, it's going to say the same thing. If I go over in, patch bay in routing and Pro Tools input switch state for each scoped input. The Pro Tools input switch is in recall safe by default. Okay, so it's just giving you information that when you select one of those parameters, what is actually going to happen when you hit the recall switch there. Okay, so this is the main user window. This is the parameter scope that we're going to be working on. All right. So let's maybe what we should do right now is actually talk about some snapshot preferences here real quick. too. So if we go to the preferences window, there's actually some snapshot preferences that we can set up. So if we go to options, snapshot, really just this top area is dealing with snapshot parameter or snapshot preferences here. Let me clear this real quick, and I'll annotate this just so you definitely get it. So we're talking about this area right here, and I'll explain this to you. All right, so if we move to the left-hand side of it, really this is just about how the snapshot list works. If I have this checked, the most recently recalled snapshot will always be centered in the list. So you can imagine, you know, in a situation, and in our snapshot system, you can have up to 999 snapshots in a single show file. If you were just hitting the next button continually after 12 or 13 snapshots, you would be recalling snapshots that you could not see anymore in the list. So this is a way of just keeping the most recently recalled ones centered in that list if you have that chosen. You can also choose to have a snapshot recall confirmed, meaning if I hit recall on the snapshot, it's going to ask me, are you sure? And then you hit recall again. Now, that's not for everybody, but in some situations, you might want that to be happening there, okay? So I usually don't have that checked, but it is a good safety mechanism to have in there. This one called Enable Strip Control on the Snapshots tab, if we have that checked, I'll explain that here as I go back. Stay with me 1 second here. Crossfade, we're choosing what controls are crossfadeable here, meaning aside from faders, pan, balance, and width is crossfadeable because we can set a crossfade time for every snapshot. We can set a default crossfade time that will apply to all snapshots once we create them. And then finally, on the right-hand side, this is only to do with preamp scope. All right, so right now we have gain, pad, and phase, and not 48-volt settings checked. So what this would mean is if we had pre-scoped for a snapshot recall and we recalled a channel where we were recalling its presetting, it's not going to recall its 48-volt status. And this is certainly something you would want to be able to choose whether you have. So in the course of a normal show, where it's one act for a number of snapshots, more often than not, your 48-volt status is not going to change in that setting. But if we were in a situation where we are going to do multiple acts, and we're going to use snapshots to go from act to act to act, then you would want to be able to recall your 48-volt settings because, you know, obviously it's not going to be the same act to act. So you have to define that. That's kind of defining what that pre-scope means, okay? So we'll go back and discuss the enabled strip control on snapshots tab. We'll check that one. And really, these are the only snapshot preferences per se, okay? So let's go back. Notice that my snapshot that I've created is now centered in the list, just like we said. But if we have that checkbox checked, notice that I can actually do some functionality in the snapshots window, which is mute a channel. I can also solo a channel, and I can move a fader here. If we have that unchecked, I am not allowed to do that on the snapshots page. I can only scope. I can't actually solo or do any functionality on the actual channels themselves, all right? So it's strictly a matter of preferences. I know for me, I like having the functionality there, but there are certainly other people that do not like having that functionality there. So I'm going to enable it. Okay. All right, let me go clear that annotation out of there so you can see it. All right, so let's work our way around the window here and kind of discuss all the different parts of it. We have a previous and next button here on the, my cursor, previous and next button here on the snapshot window. So obviously if we had two snapshots, we could engage the previous and next. So you can do it by pointing device. These are exactly the same function as the one on the center section of the control surface, which is a previous and a next. We have three types of snapshots that we can make. We have momentary and sequential, and then we also have some snapshot groups that we can make. All right, so right now, let me just create a couple of snapshots here. In this situation, we have a number of sequential snapshots, meaning they're going to work in an order. If I go previous and next, they're going to recall in order. I can obviously drag and drop these snapshots around if I want to do it and reorder them, but they're always going to be in a sequence, right? Now, as you just saw me do by accident here, we can also make parent-child snapshots, meaning we can have a parent snapshot, and then we can have a number of snapshot children that live underneath that snapshot. So I'll do that now. I'll make a couple of, just make the one. So now you see this snapshot is actually the child of this snapshot. We can close it down and drag and drop it as a set, even though I just did that incorrectly. Here. So now if we move this around, we can drag and drop this anywhere in the list, and the parent and the children will stay together, okay? There are ramifications of that in terms of editing the snapshot, which will come, I'll cover here in just a little bit. But those are parent-children snapshots. Now, we also have the capability now, and this is fairly recent in our snapshot software, but it's really powerful. This is a really powerful option for our snapshots, and that is to create a momentary snapshot. So if we create a snapshot here, notice when I designate it as momentary, it loses its sequence, right? It's no longer part of the sequence. Matter of fact, I could have, let's create a few more snapshots here just to drive home the point. Notice that I can recall that snapshot at any point and it doesn't interrupt my sequence, right? Whereas previously, when we didn't have the ability to make momentary snapshots, if you built a snapshot that was just going to do something functionally for you on the console, maybe it was going to do, readdress a microphone somewhere for your PA system alignment or whatever it would be. It wasn't part of the show snapshots. It was just something you were using Snapshot to create function on the console. It had to be in your list, and it would disrupt your flow during the show if you accidentally recalled it. So in this situation, it just immediately moves to the bottom of the list, and you can recall this without it updating or disrupting the sequence of your list, I should say. Okay, so really cool, great stuff. As we move across, you'll see a chase LTC functionality here, and that is to, just as it says, put the snapshots in chase mode, where they will chase a timecode number or a timecode input, an LTC input. So I'll have that set up to show you today as well. All right, so let's keep going across. We're going to have user aux scope. This is an additional scope. All right, so if we go back to the options menu for a second, I'm going to talk about this area here that also has to deal with scoping. Let me get my annotator up again. So this is dictating a scope for your auxes, okay? So if you notice here, we have aux-mon and aux-effects, all right? So all this is doing is dictating or kind of segmenting your auxes into two types, all right? This was really built in the initial port in the software for guys that were mixing front of house and monitors from the same console so that they could scope their auxes differently depending on whether they were effects sends or whether they were monitor mixes, all right? So you obviously wouldn't want to confuse those two things if you were doing snapshot recalls. All right, so this gives you a way to dictate those. And whatever you dictate it as, so we'll do aux 1 through 4 here, and the rest as aux-mon, the rest are effects auxes. When we go back to our page now, our snapshots page, and we go back to the main scope, notice that there is a number of different aux scopes available. I'm going to annotate this too, just to make sure you're seeing what I'm speaking about. All right, so now here is the auxiliary scope section, right? So now if we had, if we were to take and create aux-mon and aux-effects for these three inputs that were set up to recall, we would only be recalling, well, I should do it this way. If we do aux-mon for these three inputs, it's only going to recall those first 4 auxiliaries. It's not going to recall the others until we put this in. Likewise, we could do it this way where we've now eliminated the monitor auxes from recall. We only have the aux-mon available, or I mean the aux effects available. In addition, though, there is a new version of this, which is really, really powerful. If you need discrete aux capability, you're going to use what's called aux user, right? Where we can discretely scope any aux and any channel, right? So if we were to choose that and we go to the aux user scope, now we have the ability to choose any channel and any auxiliary into scope. So for instance, if I were to say channel 2 aux 3 is what I want to be scoped. Oops, I have to have the channel in scope. One second. Now, if I were to choose channel 3 and aux 4, notice it highlights them in red in that recall safe, or I mean in that user aux scope, right? So now only aux 4 on channel 3 is going to recall when I have that button in. So you can pick which channels and which auxiliaries are going to recall using the auxiliary scope. It's really, really powerful. I mean, you can just set it up so easily now to be able to do very discrete aux recalls for specific channels. Okay, really cool stuff. Let's go back to our main here. So it's worth also noting, I think I kind of forgot to mention this previous talking about scope. When we talk about scope, remember, it's on a per snapshot basis as well, right? So you can see I added 8 channels to this particular snapshot, but I haven't added it to all those channels or all those snapshots. If I go back and look at one of my other snapshots, those channels aren't in there. But it's very easy to add them if we want to do it. We just highlight the auxes that the snapshots that we want to add it to. Maybe it's these, and I say, okay, I want to add those channels to those snapshots, and then get back out of it and notice that they're in there now, right? There you go. Okay, so just keep in mind, it's on a per snapshot basis. What is scoped? You can have it different for every snapshot. All right, let's see where I'm at here. All right, so let's carry on here with that. So the last tab across the top that we'll talk about is recall safe, all right? Recall safe is a way to build even more discretion into what you recall on a given snapshot. Let's go back to our main page just for a second here. I'll recall this snapshot. So right now, in this particular snapshot, we have these 3 faders that are going to have their faders and their mutes recalled. But what if we were in a situation where we said, well, really, what I really want is my fader recalled on this channel, but I only want my mute recalled on this channel and maybe want both recalled on this channel. Well, we have the ability then to go to the recall safe and dictate that, right? We can say, okay, well, on this particular channel, I don't want the fader. Oops, let me clear this out of there. On this particular channel, I don't want the fader recalled. On this channel, I don't want the mute recalled, but on this channel, I want both fader and mute recalled, so they're out of safe, right? So notice that one of the default safes is Pro Tools input, because you have the choice of designating Pro Tools as the source on any channel as a function of snapshot. So just out of a safety mechanism, we kind of do that for you to keep you from accidentally doing that. We want that to be a very overt move for you to be able to do that. But of course, by doing this, you can build up all kinds of discretion in your recall so that, you know, when I say fader, well, it's really only these faders, even all of these channels are scoped, right? And you have the ability to library these if you want to do it. So if I go up here and click on library, I can obviously clear them all. I can have, any ones that I want. I can have up to 999 different recall safe grids if you want. And, really one of the nice ways of using this, if you have different kind of grids built, is you just open up this library and highlight the one you want, do the recall, and then cancel out of it, and it will go back to your previously saved grid, right? Or your previously active grid is what I should say. All right, so it's a really, really great way to handle it. Obviously, we have this for inputs and outputs on the entire thing. So, in addition, you have the ability to turn that recall safe grid on and off if you want to do it. So be aware of that. That's actually caught me once where I couldn't figure out why my safes weren't active. I'd actually turned it off by accident. And then you have a set of global safes here where you can say, okay, even though my safes are on, I want to just completely safe out anything MIDI, right, in my snapshots. I'd just leave it where it is. I want to carry on. Same thing with plugins. I can save all plugins here, or I can save all layouts at the push of one button. All right, so just kind of a nice, easy way to do it. All right, here. All right, so let's carry on across our window here. I'm going to move on over to the right-hand side of the scope and talk about this window to the right of it where you see MIDI and plugins here. Now, I said earlier that we work in store all, recall filtered for our snapshots. And anytime you hit store on the console, it's going to store everything on the console. The exception to that is plugins, all right? In plugin world, you have to add the plugins to the snapshot to get them subject to recall in that particular snapshot, right? And we do that in this window over here. So if I click on the plugins portion of it and I expand it out, notice there are no plugins in this window. I have to add them to it. So there are two ways to do this. There are two ways to add plugins to a given snapshot. I can add it here, or I can go to a rack and say, okay, that plugin's going to be in there. That plugin's going to be in there. And now these are subject to recall. When I hit store, it's going to store their current settings and recall them in this snapshot. Okay. So the plugins that you want to be snapshotable, you want to be in your snapshots. Okay. Now we can also do this another way. We can kind of come at it through the back door. If we go to plugins, notice that up here in the left-hand corner, this plugin actually has a red S attached to it. That's indicating that this plugin is currently in the snapshot that is working right now, that has been recalled right now. But if I want to add other plugins to that snapshot, I can just drop down the menu and say, add the plugin to the targeted snapshot, which is the one that we have loaded right now. Or we can actually create a new snapshot based entirely on this plugin, right? It would be a plugin that only has, or a snapshot that only has this plugin in it, okay? So you have the ability to do that. You also get a quick glimpse at how many snapshots contain this plugin, right? And normally there would be a list here. If you've got a bunch of them, it would list all the snapshots that actually contain the plugin that you're working with there. Okay, so kind of two different ways to do that. But you have to have the plugins in here to be able to do that. Now, that said, notice that once I added plugins, that the plugin scope button highlighted, right? Now, if I roll my mouse over that, look at what it tells me in the control set or in the recall description there. Control settings, in-circuit state, and routing for the selected plugins in the plugins list above. That plugins list is this guy right here, okay? So just be aware of that. All right, so you can, with Snapshot, you can change the routing of a plugin, you can change its insert slot, obviously all of its settings, all of that is manipulatable by Snapshot. So there's a lot of power involved there when you do that. All right, let's move over to, let's take a look at MIDI here. This is an interesting one. So in MIDI, we have a couple of different options here, right? So we can add functionality, MIDI functionality that will happen with a snapshot. So if I click on MIDI and I go add a functionality here, maybe, well, I'll just give you the obvious one that we could use quite a bit, which is MIDI machine control play, right? So if I have that in that snapshot now, and I have my Pro Tools set up to record or even just play back, if I recall that snapshot now, it should put this Pro Tools into play. See if it works. Yeah. So I've just recalled the snapshot, and it's gone into play. Now, if you can obviously build another snapshot that makes it stop or whatever you want, but it does work great. And if you have your your Pro Tools system in record ready, and you recall that snapshot, it'll put it in record and stay there until you recall and tell it something else to do. Okay, so that's just a real simple version of MIDI. You can also do all kinds of other stuff. Notice over here, I can actually put that in hexadecimal form. If you know the hex language and you want to edit it, you can do that. I can also put it in record. Let me delete this out of there. So I can put it in record. So if I had MIDI type commands that I wanted to record and then play back to something with that snapshot, I could do it. So I'm in record right now. I got a little keyboard sitting over here. So notice I just did a note on, note off, you know, another one there. So I can record any of that stuff into the snapshot and then just play it back out through the MIDI port on the console. Again, I can look at that in hex if I want to do it, or just add any of these here and edit them. So MIDI functionality is pretty good. You can pick an output channel and an input channel, what it responds to. Okay, so probably a good time then to go look at the actual snapshot itself and describe everything that is going on here, right, in the actual descriptor itself, the snapshot descriptor itself. So notice that we added MIDI to this snapshot. So notice that the MIDI icon is now blue, indicating there is actually MIDI in that snapshot. If we move right of that, that is actual time code. That is a time code number grab. So if we had time code running and we created a snapshot, it would grab that time code number and say, well, I'm assuming at that number you want to recall this snapshot. So I have a little bit of SMPTE running in the background here, which I'll try to show you here in a little bit, where you can do that grab and edit. To the right of that, you can see that it's online, and we can kind of take that snapshot on and offline individually if we want to do it. Tempo, we can dictate tempo in a snapshot. We can literally type in a number, or we can tap in a number. And once we do that, we get the new tempo. We can tell it to the snapshot to control tempo if we want to do it just simply by turning on and off the metronome. And then the green diamond over here is a really cool one, right? The diamond indicates that we're going to send a marker command out to Pro Tools, right? If we're in record and that green light is on, when I recall that snapshot, it's going to place a marker at that location in Pro Tools. Now, the important piece of this is also what happens on playback, right? If we go to virtual sound check then, and that green or diamond is checked, and I go recall that snapshot, it's going to move Pro Tools to that location and get ready to go into play. So it's a way of navigating Pro Tools by snapshot recall at that point. Really, really excellent fundamental way to do it. And finally, the second one is a lock here, right? Where we can lock the snapshot to not allow us to store over it. And I'm not going to lie to you, that one has saved me a couple of times, especially on like doing award shows, things like that, where you have multiple acts and you don't want to even remotely think about accidentally, overwriting a show, a snapshot of another band with what you got sitting on the console right now. Man, that one's good to be there, because I've tried to do it a couple times by mistake and thought, oh, yay. Thank goodness there was a lock on that snapshot. So really, really important one there. All right, where do we go from here? We'll keep going over. Up in the top right here, you can see this is where you can set crossfade time per snapshot, right? So if I put in 2.5, that means this snapshot, whatever we have in it, is going to recall at 2.5 seconds of crossfade in it. If I go to other snapshots, they're at 0. Remember, in snapshot preferences, we can set the time. If we want it to be 2.5 seconds for every snapshot, we would just set it as a preference, and from that point on, every snapshot we create would have 2.5 seconds of crossfade in it. We can obviously edit it as needed on a per snapshot basis as well. Down below this, we have the notes section here. This is strictly just notes about your snapshot. You can just type it in and off you go. Let's see if I can do it here. Oh, I can't do it because I'm on the wrong USB here. Snapshots. All right, so you can get as detailed as you want there. Now keep in mind, if you're duplicating snapshots, the notes come with it. So just be aware of that. All right, the title here, we can edit the title of our snapshot here, or we can do it here if we want to do it just with double clicks. All right, let's go over this middle section here. This is where things get really interesting here. So is where I'm just gonna delete all these snapshots for a second, and we're gonna do a little snapshotting here just to kind of drive home some of the points in this section. Okay, so hang in there with me. Just rid of all this for a second. All these snapshots. Why won't you go away? There we go. Okay, so we're going to work in this center section here. But before we do, let's just kind of break from the kind of mechanical conversation here and just talk about approach a little bit. I mean, obviously, I do a lot of mixing classes, and talking about snapshots. And I mean, really, one of the questions I get so often is, why should I use snapshots? I mean, what the heck? It's a live show, you know, it's a one-off, et cetera. Yeah, and I get it. In the one-off scenario, you're not going to be using snapshots all that much. But here's what I suggest to people to do, especially working with our snapshot system, is even if you're on a festival and you're working with a band, maybe you're recording it, maybe multi-tracking, maybe even two-tracking, maybe on something like S6L where you have a two-track record that is built into the USB on the console. You want to get yourself in the mindset and the muscle memory of recalling snapshots. It's a good thing to do. So even on those festival shows, enter your set list into the snapshot window, turn on markers, and now every time you recall a marker, it's going to highlight it in Pro Tools. When Pro Tools goes into the studio, into post, they're going to have markers. They're going to know what names have been recorded. So even if you had nothing changing on the console in that situation, at least you've done the marker work. Would be the same thing on the two-track record in USB, right? If I recall my set list as it's happening, my marker, it's going to rename those WAV files. So now I already have the work done on them. So it is saving you work, whether you believe it or not. And you want to get in the habit of recalling it, just in case you want to get to the point where you can start doing actual recalls during your show. You want that kind of muscle memory created of songs over, you know, pause, next recall, go. So, you know, get in the habit of doing it, because especially with a system like ours, which is store all recalled filtered, you can very gradually build yourself into a set of recalls. And with that in mind, you know, the idea is the most success I've seen with this, with people using snapshots in live show, is to treat it like another pair of hands. Treat it like your A2, right? If you were going to say to your A2, okay, before the next song that is coming, I need you to mute these two channels and push these two faders up, right? He would do it, right? And that's kind of how you need to think about snapshot. I just need it to be a pair of hands that does kind of my shopping list and allows me to get ready to mix the next song, right? And then, of course, you know, you might say that A2 at the end of the song, okay, at the next song, I need you to unmute those channels and push those faders down. Well, that's got to be part of your next recall. So treat it as another pair of hands. And the other thing that kind of comes with that is that what that implies is go slow, right? I mean, this is a mindset that is kind of, certainly it was built into me working in the studio, working in runtime automation, is that before you ever build your first snapshot, even attempt it, get your mix pretty well set. Get things kind of set where you want them to be, where you believe they're going to be, and then you're just going to make edits and augmentation of that settings throughout the night, right? But if you haven't even pushed up a fader yet or set a gain or anything yet, and you're starting to create snapshots, you're just going to make so much work for yourself, okay? So we kind of build that mentality into our snapshots the way it works right out of the gate when you create a new snapshot. And you kind of noticed that when I built one earlier. You know, if I go to create a new snapshot, look what it does. It sets up all the inputs and outputs and layouts to be available for snapshot recall, and only the faders and mutes, right? In runtime automation, when we're working in the studio, what's the first thing we do? We write our mutes. Before we ever start writing fader automations, we write mutes. Get all your mutes sorted out, and then add your faders and start doing fader moves. And then after that, as you need to do more and more parameters, maybe plug-in changes, et cetera, it just organically builds on a per song basis in the studio. Here, it's on a per show basis, right? So notice, even though we've built one snapshot here now, only faders and mutes are available for all of these channels. Well, I may not, do I actually need to have it recallable for all input and output channels? Probably not, right? Probably not. So we're just gonna clear out the channel scopes. I'm just gonna clear it out and say, okay, whatever faders I now scope are now gonna be available for recall, okay? So let's just do it here. I'm just gonna, see, I'll do it here just so we can kind of see it. So I've just selected all of these channels for scope, and I'm actually gonna take these out for a second, right? So now I'm gonna label this. Okay, now here's the other piece of it, and why I say you want to go slow. We've created our first snapshot. Let's just say, okay, just for the sake of argument, this is our mix. As wacky as that looks, we're going to let it look wacky. That's all right, just to make it stick out. All right, so notice I've got 4 faders that are not in scope, but 4 faders that are in scope. So now I've created my first snapshot and say, okay, I want to keep that. Let's store that. All right, so what I've done now by storing this is stored all fader positions on the console. But when I hit recall, of course, it's only going to recall the channels I have in scope, right? Likewise, if I have these faders down and I hit recall, guess what? It's not going to change those faders because they're not scoped, right? But because it's store all recall filtered, if I were to go back and add these faders, look at what happens there. I get some green lines on the faders there that indicate where those faders are stored, right? Because we stored it without them being scoped. Now, if I hit recall, it puts them back where the original store was. So that's part of the power of having recall filtered, right? The information is always there if you need to go get it in the snapshot. And this plays really importantly into an idea that we have, or a concept that we have with this, which is importing snapshots. You can import a snapshot from a previous show file that is going to have the entire console stored in it. And then you're going to select what you want to recall out of that, right? You're going to scope one channel, scope one parameter, and maybe only recall that, right? But all of that is sitting in there in that snapshot when you bring it in. Okay, so all of that said, we can, if we get back to the center section of the console here, we can disable snapshots completely here. If we want to do snapshots, disable them for a little bit and work, and then come back to them, we can. If we go, remember I spoke earlier about preview mode. If we go to preview mode now, actually, let me do this before I go to preview mode. Let's duplicate this snapshot just for a second. I'm going to recall it, and actually, we'll do this. This will be fun. So I'm going to recall this, and we're going to go into preview mode now, and we're going to recall this second snapshot. Now, the first snapshot is operating on the console right now. Audio is passing through just as we left it when we hit the preview button. But now I can go in and edit a little bit here and store that in this previewed snapshot, get out of preview, and jumps back to our first snapshot, which is the active one. And then if we go to the next snapshot, there's our new store that we created in preview. This is incredibly powerful. It has absolutely saved my butt on some award shows and TV style shows where you might be working from a script and something has changed over the intercom where you say, okay, no, they're not going to go to that mic. They're going to go to this one now, blah, blah, blah. Just put it in preview, go to the snapshot, make the change, come back out. Now you go there. It's going to be right. You won't have to change it on the fly, right? So it's a really powerful way of doing it. Now, all right, so we're back to our original shot here. All right, so let's do a little bit of work here now. I'm going to create some additional snapshots here. Actually, this is probably a good time to do this, talk about this as well. Notice when I created a new snapshot, right? Obviously, there were no plugins involved in it, right? And again, this is why I want to get you to the point of thinking, I want to get my mix pretty well set before I create my first snapshot. And here's why. And you want to include your plugin processing with that, right? Get my plugins set. And most importantly, I want to figure out what plugins I'm likely to snapshot during the night, right? More often than not, it's reverbs, delays, things like that, right? Those are the things that are going to get recalled, almost religiously. So you want to make sure and add those to your first snapshot, right? So I'm going to go add a couple here, just for the sake of argument. Matter of fact, I'll add all of these, just so we can say we did. Yeah, there we go. So actually, I'll add the first 4. So I've got these first 4 plugins inserted on these first 4 dark channels down in that section where you see the faders up. And the plugins that are inserted on the red channels are not in this snapshot. Maybe I should add them. I probably should. Let me just do it quickly here. All right. So now here's the reason that I say you want to do this as early in the game as you can, right? Because if I don't do that and I create a new snapshot, it's not going to have these plugins in it, right? Notice if I create new now, the plugins are gone, right? But if I have them in there and I go duplicate and work from this plugin for our next snapshot, now it's got all the plugins in it. So it's very important to understand the difference between new and duplicate. Duplicate is working on that premise that I've got a good mix, I've got a base mix belt that I'm going to augment throughout the night. I'm just going to make edits and changes on it as we go. New snapshot kind of indicates I'm kind of starting over. I'm really going to be a very different thing, even though it's kept the scope that I have there, right? Okay, so just be aware of it. Now, the other kind of important thing to note here is that even though that new plugin, I created the new plugin, it automatically scoped the plugins, but there are none in the list. So just be aware, you want to work from duplicates if you're working with one act through here, right? Okay, so be aware there. All right, so I'm going to create some more plugins or some more snapshots here. I'm going to create about 3, 4 snapshots. Let's get them listed in so we can do this effectively. All right. So I'm going to recall these snapshots and notice they're all identical of each other right now. All right, so we're sitting there in snapshot, and that one's good. But now we go to the next song, and you think, this fader really needs to be here, right? I need to just make this fader here. How do I update this snapshot? And this is where we're going to use the update button. Now, of course, if that's the only change you made, and you can totally get away with this, you just have to be aware. I could just go store, store. And now, remember, it's stored everything on the console in the current settings, but it's only going to recall these 4 channels, and it's going to recall that fader in that position now. There were no changes on the first 2 red channels and the 4th red channel, so it wouldn't make any difference to hit store there anyway. But what I think is a much more definitive way to do it, if you can get used to doing it, is using the update button. So I'm going to push this back up and store this here again. So let's say we recalled that snapshot and we said, no, really what I need it to be is here. This is a really good space for me here. I want to update that snapshot. You would go update. Now, this is the only time in the console, in using the software, that you're going to scope a store. This is the only time it ever happens, right? So in this situation, you're in update mode. It's saying, okay, what do you want to update? I'm going to choose this fader and the fader scope and the snapshot, right? I've got the snapshot, only one snapshot chosen, and say update. Notice the green line moved for the fader. And now if I go to the previous snapshot and the next snapshot, only that fader is moved. Matter of fact, yeah, because I moved that other fader, right? All right, so only that 3rd fader adjusted. All right, so what if we wanted to update multiple snapshots? And this is where it gets back to a propagate, right? So I'm going to recall this, and I'm going to store this back over here. All right, so snapshot 1 and 2 are identical right now. So let's say we recall snapshot 2, and we make that same change, and we think, oh boy, that's really where I want that to be for the rest of the night. You know, not just in that 2nd snapshot. Well, we would go update, fader, right? Now we're ready to update it, but now we're going to select multiple snapshots, right? We're going to go down and select, maybe we'll just do these. We're just going to update these. Say, okay, those are the songs that I want to be updating right now. And if I click update now, it's going to update only those snapshots. So if we recall it, and go next, notice that it's done all of them except for that fifth one that we had darkened out. So that's if for you guys that used to use our software pre-S6L, that's the equivalent of propagate, right? So now keep in mind, this is, like I said, this is the only scoped store that you're ever going to do on the console, really, for the most part, is in that update mode, okay? Now, there's an alternate version of this called edit, right? And edit is a little bit more real-time. In update, remember, that's kind of a post-process, meaning you're going to make a change, and then you're going to put it somewhere, right? You're going to send it to a bunch of places. Well, we can do a similar process here in update or in edit, all right? So let me do this again. I'm going to do this to get us back to a level playing field here. So now I've just stored over all of those snapshots. They're all identical right now, all right? But let's say we go to edit mode. We're in this snapshot right here, and we go to edit mode, and we say, okay, I want to do a relative. Oh no, I'm sorry. Let me set it up one way different here. This will be a little bit. Let's. I'm going to do this in a really, really obvious way for you here, so you can get it. So let's store this here. Let me just. With me. Just had a little bit of an idea here that I want to show you. Here. Okay, so now I've just got that one fader position stored in all of these snapshots. Now, if we go to edit, nope, sorry, one more time. I'm getting ahead of myself. Oh, gosh. All right, so I'm going to go to the next snapshot and go to the next snapshot and make a little fader move and store it. Next snapshot, make another little fader move and store it. And we'll do one more. I'll go one more and put it down. Okay, so if we go back and recall this now, you can see all these different fader positions for that snapshot, right? Now, if we have it here and we edit a little bit and we say, okay, what I want to do is actually put 2 dB of change in all of those positions, right? I say, wow, okay, this is good for this song, but I've got a lot of fader moves on that throughout the night. I don't really want to overwrite all my fader moves to this position. I just want to subtract 2 dB from all the other positions. Well, in that situation, we would make the change, select the snapshots, and then go relative, right? Relative. And now when we recall those snapshots, notice that there's 2 dB of change in all of those, right? It's kept the offsets, but just changed all of them 2 dB. Now, likewise, as I'm sure you've probably gathered by now, if we do the same thing and we do absolute, so now we say, okay, no, this is my fader position. That's where that bass guitar, whatever, that's where that needs to be the rest of the night. I don't want it to move. Well, then we go edit. We select our snapshots and our faders and go absolute, right? And recall it. Now, oops, did I miss it? I must have. There we go. Yeah, and now when I make the changes or the snapshot recalls, notice that fader does not move the green line indicating where all the stores are for that given channel, right? So obviously this applies to all the parameters. And yes, guys, I know the cursor is no longer shown on the screen, but I can't do both here because it's a VNC. So just hang in with me. Just watch those red faders and the button highlights as they happen, okay? Bear with it. Nothing really happening cursor-wise here other than just the selections of the snapshots. All right, let's see. So that is kind of using the update modes, the edit mode and the update mode. That update mode also applies when you're using groups. You know, you can set up, notice that, you know, I was just selecting to get these snapshots done in a given way, but you can also create snapshot groups if you want to do it. So let's select, I'll select all the odd groups here, and let's make those group A, and we'll make all the evens group B, just for the sake of argument. All right. So now if I make an edit in snapshot A, and I'm going to update that, it's going to ask me, oops, and I want to store that. It's going to say you're storing a snapshot within a group. Do you want to store all of these snapshots in that group? So you have a choice here. You can select all, which would be all of the A snapshots, or just do the selected only. If I do all, now when I go to recall those snapshots, all of them are, all snapshots are going to have that new position, right? Same thing with B. So it really, you know, grouping in this situation is a way to set up some pre-selection for that sort of thing. That same thing applies to the update and the edit process as well. If you update and edit a group, it's going to ask you if you want to update or edit all of the snapshots in that group, you know, you just have to choose whether you want to do it or not. Same thing would apply for parent-child. If we have a parent-child and you update the parent, it's going to ask if you want to update all the children as well. So kind of cool. Very, very functional, easy way to do it. All right, let's see. What else have we got to cover here? One thing we should discuss in these snapshots as well is, let me clear some of this out of here, is how to handle updating plugins, right? I'm going to get the groups out. All right, so we're back to our first snapshot with the recall in it. So how do we update and store plugins, right? So let's take a look at, let's just recall this snapshot. We'll go to the plugin that is on that, that channel, which is 7, that'll be this one. So here's our plugin. We're gonna make some changes. And because we've got this in the snapshots window there, if I hit store now, and then recall a different snapshot, you should see that it goes away. But if I go to the previous snapshot, the plugin is changed with it. So we're just bouncing right back and forth now between that first snapshot and the second snapshot. You can see that down in the lower center of the screen where the snapshot indicator is. Okay, so just bouncing back and forth. All right, so we're going to leave that one recalled and go back to our snapshots window. And if we want to update just the snapshot, we can, or just the plugin, we can do that as well. So I'm going to go back there and make an update. We'll make this just really obvious here. Go back to snapshots and find that plugin, which I believe it's number 7, if I remember right. We right click on that plugin and we get the choices of updating or removing the plugin. Obviously, we want to update that particular plugin. So now that plugin is updated in that snapshot. If we go recall snapshot 2, it's there. We recall plugin 1 or snapshot 1 now. We've only updated the plugin there. Okay? So similar kind of paradigm there in that plugins window. You know, you can select multiple plugins to update if you need to do it. You know, you can update them all for the targeted snapshot. You can target multiple snapshots if you want to do it, and then come up here and update multiple plugins across multiple snapshots as well. So I hope that is clear to everybody. How are we doing on time here? Yeah, we're just right at about an hour. That's great. All right, so we've covered most of the functionality here, I believe. I think we're going to make it and get it all in 1 hour here. Let me just review my notes here real quick, guys, and make sure we haven't missed anything here. I'm sure some of the question and answers will drive me to the right places. So, one last thing I'll touch on in edit mode, because obviously I was just concentrating on faders here. But, edit mode works on anything in the console that is, that it can work in a relative fashion, meaning gain on equalizers, etc. Matter of fact, maybe let's do that. Let's go to our fader here. I'm just going to work on one fader here so we can deal with that. All right, so we're just going to be working on this one fader here, and I'm going to add EQ to the scope here. All right, so we're going to recall it, and I'm going to store this here. So let's look at the equalizer on that channel, and that is the guy that you see right now. Actually, you know what? Let me do this. I'll do it here. That way I can show it to you on screen. Stand by. I'm going to include 25. All right, so let's go here now. So channel 25. So again, I'm just going to put in some crazy EQ here if you want. This way. I'm going to go just ultra wide here. We're just going to create just some EQ stores here. So I'm going to say this is our EQ. We're going to store that in snapshot 1. So that EQ changes in snapshot 1 right now. Now, if we wanted to edit that, let me get over here where you can see it. So just remember the edit process here. I'm gonna kind of maybe I can do that. So I'm gonna now say I'm gonna absolute edit that EQ into each one of the snapshots. So go to absolute, and I make my adjustment, select my snapshots, and hit absolute. And now, as I recall snapshots, that EQ change should be in all of them, right? Oops. Did I not do it? I may not have done it. Oh, actually, I get what it is. I'm sorry, my mistake here. Stand by for me. Okay, so as I recall all of those snapshots, you can see it's the same EQ in each one. If I do an edit now, oops, let me just do it this way. If I go edit, choose my snapshots, make the change, and make it an absolute edit, any one of those snapshots has that change in it, right? Because it's an absolute edit. If I want to do a relative edit, same process, right? So I would go select the snapshots I want. I'm going to make a 2 dB change in our guy and go relative, although it's not going to show it because it's all the same snapshot, and then go next. Notice it's changed them all by the same amount, right? So if we had offsets in that EQ throughout the snapshots, it would only do the 2 dB change in each one of those boosts for the snapshot. So anything that is relative like that on the console, meaning auxiliaries, fader moves, switches are not going to be subject to relative changes. Those are always going to be absolute changes. You can make changes like that and propagate them across. So really, really cool stuff. Very, very fluent snapshot system here. I really, really love it. Okay. So in terms of the rest of the functionality here, new and duplicate, we talked about that. You can clear a given snapshot if you want to do it. I'll just clear that guy. Notice he just turns into an open snapshot now. He doesn't necessarily delete it, but we can delete it if we want to do that as well. We have an undo function that is for snapshot creation, where you can create a snapshot, undo it, et cetera. There's kind of a limited undo there, so be careful with what you want. But that said, if you make some gigantic faux pas doing this, remember we always have the history files in our filing section to be able to go back and reload a piece of history, okay, which will take you back in time, maybe just previous to the snapshot creation or even a snapshot recall and get you back where you wanted. Okay. All right. Well, we're at 1 hour and 10 minutes, and I think that probably is just going to about cover everything we want to cover in snapshots. So let's see. Oh, my friend Ryan is asking if I hit LTC. I did hit LTC, but I'm going to do it here because I can actually show it a little better. So thank you for Ryan for reminding me of that. So as you see here, I got time code capture points for this snapshot. I'm going to delete a bunch of these out of there. Thanks for reminding me there, Ryan. I appreciate it. Out. All right. Matter of fact, yeah, I'll just do this. All right. So in the lower right-hand corner there, let me get over here where you can see it again. I got to move the screen. You can kind of see time code running there now, right? So once I have that, if I right-click up here, notice it'll capture the time that I right-clicked, right? So that time is there. Same thing if I create a duplicate channel, it's going to duplicate the time code. If I create a new time code or new snapshot, it's going to capture a new event. So you can do that however you want to do it here. So once I have that done, and then I go to recall, or I go into snapshot ready, if I start the SMPTE sequence over and over again, it will recall these snapshots at those times. Start it again here. So I'm going back to the top of that recall now. You should see the recalls happen. See here, I'm hoping it doesn't make a liar out of me. Oh, wait a minute, I got to have my chase button on here. I'm sorry. Turn on the chase button, and there we go. That's the first recall, second recall. And when we get to the 12-second mark, it will recall that last one. Thank goodness Ryan's watching here. He's telling chase, dude. Okay, so yeah, it works really great, really fluently. Obviously, you can go in and edit these times. If you need to trim something up on the recall, you can trim the time back and forth to get it to swing in a little better for your recall. Okay, so good stuff there. Ryan, I'll ping you, Ryan. Did I miss anything? Is there anything I forgot to cover? I've just spaced it out. It's a lot to cover in 1 hour, man.
No, I think you got all the important stuff. Although someone did ask that we could do an advanced snapshot workflow thing, and I think that's more requesting as to how you like to use Snapshot specifically, rather than the functionality within the system. I think that would be a fun other webinar.
I'll self-promote that one and say I will do that. That is scheduled for an upcoming lab on Mondays. So if you guys any of you are following what I'm doing on Mondays, this webinar called The Lab, I have that exact same thing slated for it at an upcoming lab. So I'll show you how I use them during an actual show. We'll pull up an actual show file and kind of go through it. I won't say head to toe because it's going to be hours of work, but I can show you what I'm doing in an actual show file.
Hey, Robert, we got a few questions here you might want to cover if you got time.
Bring it on. I got nothing but time, man, right now. Let's talk.
All right. So number one, can you recall a snapshot while in preview? And if so, does it automatically take you out of the preview?
The answer is yes and no. So in preview, you can recall a snapshot, and that will pull it up and make it available for edit to you. But it does not kick you out of your previously recalled snapshot. It keeps that one loaded. And honestly, that's the way you would want to do it. So, I would say that's the yes and the no of that. Yeah, in preview, you can recall it and store a snapshot while another snapshot is running.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is being able to recall another snapshot, store, and then go back and forth.
Correct. Yeah.
Question number two, is there a global scope?
Global scope meaning Have all
Meaning-
scoped?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you look at the window, which I think I still have the share up there, if you select all, that's going to scope all parameters, and then double click all on channels, and that will put all faders, all parameters in scope.
Yeah, and the same for the faders. Down below, there's the all and the none as well.
That's correct, yeah. So if I click, double click
And
none.
next, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, that's all right. You know, one thing I didn't cover, and really I knew if I went here, we would go way out of bounds time-wise, is the ability to recall snapshots using events. You know, that is a really, really powerful thing, and it's something I will definitely cover in the lab for sure, because I have lots of snapshots that are recalled with events. And by events, meaning I can have anything initiate a snapshot recall. I can have a fader move. Once a fader moves past a certain area, it recalls a snapshot. You can even have it where you can chain snapshots together. Move the fader, it recalls a snapshot. 3 seconds later, it recalls the next snapshot right on down the line until the sequence is done. So you can get really, really deep using events for snapshot recalls. Matter of fact, next I'll do some more self-promoting. In the next lab, which is 2 weeks from this past Monday, I'm going to be doing one on audience miking where I use snapshots to do patching of audience mics into my smart computer and do an impulse gather for all of those microphones. And it takes about 2 or 3 seconds to do it. It's really a great workflow, and it's stored in your Pro Tools session. That's the best part of it. So come and look in on that. That's really a fun one to deal with.
Perfect. Yeah, that actually covered 2 questions. Somebody asked about
Nice.
events and snapshots. And then somebody asked if you could actually show how you could have one snapshot trigger another snapshot 2 seconds later. And of course, you have to use events.
I believe I can. Stand by. I have to get to control window to do that. Let's see here. Let's do a new one. Let's add recall snapshot 1, and then add the action be recall snapshot 2. All right, so I've got it set up where I recall snapshot 1, and then 2 seconds later, it's going to recall snapshot 2. Let's see if it works. Boink. How's that for you?
Perfect. And you can see the little indicator there on snapshot 1 that is going to trigger another one there as well.
Yeah, that's correct.
And last but not least,
Oh, are you there? Did I lose you?
tight. Hold on 1 second. I got to find it here. What is your preferred workflow for a festival? Load individual files for each artist or use snapshot imported into master show file?
It depends totally on 2 things. It depends on whether you have a master system to deliver audio to your PA system, meaning an outboard matrix that is basically going to take a left-right subs, whatever, break it down to its simplest version. Most festivals at some point need a left, right, and a sub, and then get it delivered to the PA system. If that is in play, then I will load show files, time permitting. So there's 2 things in play there. If I've got an external matrix that only needs a left, right, and a sub to it, then I'll want to do show files, but only if there's enough changeover time between acts to do that. Because let's face it, all show files, regardless of what they do, at some point come down to a left, right, and probably an aux that drives the subs, right? So it doesn't matter what show file I load on there, I'll be able to get it to the PA system properly. If I'm building PA drive into a master console that is going to load show files, then that's a much, much different concept, right? Honestly, I suggest and try to guide all sound companies that are going to be doing festivals, externally matrix your PA system, okay? Even if you're using a console to drive your PA system, that's fine, but don't, if you have guests come in, have them be on an external console and bring it into that console and distribute it to the PA system. It gets really, I don't care whose system you're on, it gets messy trying to do an output-driven PA system that is driven from the output of the console and loading the input side of it and have it all routed properly and architected properly on a show file. That is incredibly complex. So I hope that answers it. It depends on time. like I'll give you another example for TV shows, for et cetera, or award shows, where we may have a matter of a couple of minutes to move from one act to another. I almost always do that with Snapshot. I don't reload a show file there. Just the time is too pressing to risk a show file load, right? I don't care whose console you're on. At that point, the situation is kind of dictating the workflow there.
Cool. I believe that's it.
That's it. Obviously, I didn't do the job well enough. There's not enough questions. All right, guys. Well, that was a long one, and I thank you very much for hanging in there. I knew we were going to probably go over time, but I was really trying not to break this across two webinars here. So thank you for hanging in there with us. As I said, look for one on snapshots here in the coming weeks in the lab, and so we will definitely do some deep digging in there and talk about all these kind of functions and see them in real play, as opposed to talking about them just as they work here. So thanks again for coming. Tell all your friends. The playback will be up on YouTube soon if they want to check it out. But thanks for tuning in today. We will see you guys later.